glance at the gardener, and the millionaire froze. He was wearing the pendant she had given her son, before he disappeared 18 years ago. The heels of Lauren Bennett's Louboutins clicked rhythmically against the marble floor of her mansion as she strode through the East Wing corridor. At 48, she carried herself with the rigid posture of someone who had learned that weakness was a luxury she couldn't afford. Her tailored navy suit, armor for the corporate battlefield, remained as impeccable at 4 in the afternoon as it had been at 7 that morning. The mansion, sprawling across 5 acres of prime real estate, felt cavernous around her. Like her, it was pristine, imposing, and ultimately empty. Sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating artwork worth millions, but failing to warm the cold elegance of her surroundings. Lauren paused at the window overlooking the gardens. Her eyes were drawn to the new gardener, the young man her estate manager had hired 3 weeks ago. Jesse, she remembered. He'd been quiet during the brief introduction, respectful with downcast eyes that betrayed an intelligence her instincts had immediately registered. He moved methodically among her prized roses, carefully pruning each bush with unexpected precision for someone so young. 20, according to his application. Saving for medical school, he'd said, as Lauren watched him. Something caught the afternoon light, a glint of green at his throat that became visible when he stretched to reach a higher branch. The flash of emerald sent a jolt through her body that made her palm slam against the glass. A pendant, an emerald pendant in the shape of a key. Memories crashed through her carefully constructed walls. A nursery with pale blue walls, a mobile spinning lazily overhead, her own voice singing lullabies to a tiny bundle. And the pendant, the one she'd commissioned from the finest jeweler in the city, a special piece to celebrate the birth of her son, with his initials, AB, engraved on the back, the pendant that had disappeared the night they took her baby. Lauren pressed her forehead against the cool glass, fighting to control her breathing as the memories continued their assault. Thunder had crashed outside the windows of the mansion 18 years ago, rain lashing violently against the glass as she'd nursed 8-week-old Aiden in the rocking chair. James had been away on business, or so he'd told her. She would later learn he'd actually been meeting with his lawyer, changing his will to leave 70% of his fortune to his newborn son. The security alarm had been disabled. An inside job, police would later tell her. 3 masked men had burst through the nursery door. Her screams had been lost in the storm as they'd ripped Aiden from her arms. The last thing she remembered was the glint of the emerald pendant around her baby's neck, before something hard struck the back of her head. She'd woken to chaos, police swarming the property, her brother-in-law Frank pacing the foyer in apparent distress. The kidnappers had left no trace, no ransom note. As days stretched into weeks, hope had withered. 6 months later, James died in what police ruled a tragic accident, his car plunging off a coastal road. Within a year, Lauren learned that James had changed his will shortly before Aiden's kidnapping. The timing had always struck her as too convenient. But she'd had no proof of foul play. Frank had been devastated by his brother's death, or had appeared to be. He'd stayed by her side, becoming her closest advisor as she took control of the Bennett empire. The business became her salvation, her ruthless efficiency in the boardroom earning her a reputation that kept competitors and gold diggers at a safe distance. But she'd never stopped looking for Aiden, never stopped following leads that inevitably led nowhere, never removed the identical pendant she wore beneath her blouses, hidden from the world but constantly pressing against her heart. And now, impossibly, there it was, dangling from the neck of her 20-year-old gardener. Lauren stepped back from the window, her mind calculating possibilities with the same cold precision that had made her one of the most formidable businesswomen in the country. It couldn't be a coincidence. The pendant had been custom-made, one of a kind, made for her son. Her first instinct was to rush outside, confront the boy, demand answers. But 18 years of disappointment had taught her caution. If Jesse was somehow connected to Aiden's kidnapping, startling him would only send him running. No, she would be methodical. She would investigate him quietly while watching him closely. The pendant was her first real lead in years. She wouldn't risk losing it through impulsive action. Lauren pressed the intercom on the wall. "Diana, please have Mr. Ellis come to my study immediately." She needed her head of security to begin a thorough background check on Jesse. Meanwhile, she would find ways to interact with the boy, to study him for any clue, any connection to her stolen child. 10 minutes later, She sat at her desk while Robert Ellis, former FBI agent and her most trusted employee, took notes. "I want everything," Lauren said, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. "School records, family history, medical records, social media, every detail of his life from birth until now. And I want it done discreetly," Ellis nodded, knowing better than to ask questions. "I'll have preliminary findings by tomorrow morning." After he left, Lauren opened her desk drawer and removed a small silver frame, the only photograph of Aiden she kept visible. In it, he was just 6 weeks old. Tiny fists raised as if ready to fight the world, she traced her finger over the image. "Is it you?" she whispered. "Have you somehow found your way back to me?" Her rational mind rejected the notion. Jesse was too old to be Aiden, who would only be 18 now. But the pendant. There had to be a connection. As Lauren replaced the photo, her intercom buzzed. "Ms. Bennett, Mr. Frank Bennett is here to see you." Lauren straightened her spine, composed her features into the mask of calm confidence she had perfected over the years. Send him in, if anyone might know something about the pendant's reappearance. It would be Frank. She would watch his reaction carefully when she mentioned the new gardener. After all these years of playing the devoted brother-in-law, Frank Bennett still had secrets. Lauren was certain of it, and she was finally ready to uncover them all. Jesse's fingers traced the outline of the emerald pendant as he entered his small apartment on the edge of town. The studio was sparse but meticulously organized. A twin bed with hospital corners, a desk with neatly arranged textbooks, and a corkboard covered with news clippings and photos above it. It was the home of someone with greater aspirations than his current circumstances allowed. He shrugged off his work clothes. Still carrying the scent of soil and roses from the Bennett estate, the gardening job paid well enough, but that had never been the point. As he showered away the day's labor, his mind returned to the moment he'd noticed Lauren Bennett watching him from the mansion window. The cold calculation in her eyes hadn't escaped him. She'd seen the pendant, exactly as he'd intended, clean and changed into jeans and a t-shirt. Jesse moved to the corkboard and unpinned a faded photograph. A smiling woman in her 30s stood beside a much younger version of himself, her arm protectively around his shoulders. Grace Alvarez, his mother and former head housekeeper of the Bennett estate, had the same determined set to her jaw that Jesse now carried. "Making progress, Mom," he whispered to the photograph. She noticed today. He remembered the night 10 years ago when his mother had sat him down, her hands trembling as she held the emerald pendant. "There are things I need to tell you, Jesse," she'd said, her voice strained from the cancer that would take her just weeks later. "About what happened at the Bennett house, about why we had to leave." Grace had been there the night of the kidnapping. She'd heard Lauren's screams through the storm and rushed to the nursery, arriving just as the kidnappers fled with baby Aiden. She'd followed them outside, hidden in the shadows of the garden, and witnessed something that had changed everything. Frank Bennett paying the men, his face twisted with satisfaction as he instructed them on where to take the child, when one of the kidnappers had fumbled with something that fell into the wet grass. Grace had retrieved it after they'd gone. The emerald pendant that had been torn from baby Aiden's neck. "I tried to tell Mrs. Bennett what I'd seen," Grace had explained to Jesse, "but before I could reach her, Frank intercepted me. He threatened you, said he'd hurt my child if I ever spoke a word. They'd fled that night, changing their names and moving across the country. For 8 years, they'd lived in hiding, until Grace's cancer diagnosis had forced them back for treatment in a city with better medical facilities. But even on her deathbed, Grace had remained terrified of Frank Bennett. "Promise me, Jesse," she'd whispered, pressing the pendant into his palm. "Promise me you'll find a way to tell Lauren Bennett the truth someday. But be careful. Frank is more dangerous than you know. James's death was no accident." Jesse pinned the photo back to the board and opened his laptop. His latest background check on Frank Bennett had revealed the man's continued involvement in businesses with questionable ethics. Nothing explicitly illegal, but patterns that suggested money laundering, not enough to prove he'd orchestrated a kidnapping and murder 18 years ago, but enough to confirm Jesse's suspicions that Frank's respectable facade hid something sinister. His phone buzzed with a text from a contact at City Hall. "Records you requested ready for pickup tomorrow. 9 a.m., back entrance." Jesse smiled grimly, one step closer to proving what Frank had done. 20 miles away, in a rundown apartment complex across town. A young man with intense blue eyes stared at his reflection in a cracked bathroom mirror. Aiden, though that wasn't the name he'd grown up with, studied his features with new awareness. For 18 years, he'd believed he was Derek Miller, the son of Glenn Miller, a man who straddled the line between small-time criminal and legitimate businessman. But 3 weeks ago, while searching for tax documents in his adoptive father's desk, he'd found a hidden compartment containing a medallion with a baby photo and the name Aiden Bennett engraved on the back. The confrontation with Glenn had been explosive. "You were never supposed to find that," Glenn had said, suddenly looking older than his 55 years. "I was supposed to tell you when you turned 21. The truth had come out in pieces, each more shocking than the last. How Frank Bennett had hired Glenn's crew for what was supposed to be a simple theft of business documents. How plans had changed at the last minute, with Frank demanding they take the baby instead. How Frank had killed 2 of Glenn's men when they'd demanded more money for the kidnapping. "I couldn't let him kill you too," Glenn had explained. "Frank wanted you raised in the criminal world, said someday he'd use you for something big, but I couldn't do that to a baby. I tried to raise you right, kept you away from the worst of my business." Aiden turned away from the mirror, his mind still reeling from the revelation. His entire life had been a lie. The woman he'd occasionally seen in the society pages, Lauren Bennett, cold-eyed titan of industry, was his biological mother, and the man who'd orchestrated his kidnapping was still free, still playing the role of trusted advisor to the mother he'd never known. Glenn was now in county lockup on unrelated charges. A convenient setup by Frank, Aiden suspected, designed to pressure Glenn now that Aiden was approaching the age Frank had apparently been waiting for. 2 days ago, one of Frank's men had approached him with an opportunity, a chance to join Frank's crew for a job that would set him up for life. Aiden had accepted, sensing this might be his only chance to discover what Frank had planned for him all these years. His phone rang. Speak of the devil. "Tomorrow night, 9 o'clock, Frank's lieutenant said without preamble. "Corner of Wilshire and 8th. Don't be late." The call ended as abruptly as it had begun. Aiden placed the phone carefully on the counter and opened the drawer beneath the sink, removing a small handgun Glenn had insisted he keep for protection. "Whatever Frank wants you for," Glenn had warned from behind the jail visiting room glass. "It ain't good. He's been waiting 18 years for this. Be careful, son." Son. The word had new meaning now, layered with complications Aiden was still trying to understand. He tucked the gun into his waistband and returned to the small living room where news articles about Lauren and Frank Bennett covered his coffee table. His real mother and the man who'd stolen him from her. Tomorrow, he'd be one step closer to understanding why. Lauren Bennett stood in the doorway of her library, watching Jessie examine the medical texts on the mahogany shelves. It had been 3 days since she'd spotted the pendant. 3 days of subtle observation and background checks that had yielded frustratingly little. "You seem quite interested in those," she said, making her presence known. Jessie turned, momentarily startled. "Ms. Bennett, I'm sorry. Diana mentioned you wouldn't mind if I looked at your collection during my lunch break. I can leave if—" "No need." Lauren stepped into the room, her eyes drawn again to the emerald pendant visible against his t-shirt. "I understand you're saving for medical school." "Yes, ma'am." "Cardiology." His hand unconsciously went to the pendant, a gesture Lauren noted with practiced detachment. An ambitious goal. She moved to the shelves, pulling down a leather-bound volume. This was my late husband's Gray's Anatomy, first edition. He collected medical texts, though he was in real estate, not medicine. Jessie accepted the book with reverence. "Thank you. I'll be careful with it. You're welcome to use the library whenever you'd like." Lauren's voice remained casual, though nothing about this interaction felt casual to her. These books should be read, not just displayed. The gratitude in Jessie's eyes surprised her, genuine and unguarded. For a moment, she saw something achingly familiar in his expression. It reminded her of James when they'd first met. That same earnest intensity. "That's very kind of you, Ms. Bennett." "Lauren," she corrected, surprising herself. "When we're discussing books, at least." She watched him carefully page through the anatomy text, struck by his gentle handling of the aged paper. Robert Ellis's preliminary report had been conspicuously thin. Jesse Alvarez, age 20, graduated top of his class from Southridge High School. Mother deceased. Cancer, approximately 10 years ago, no record of a father, lived in foster care until 18. Excellent academic record, but few specifics before age 10. It was the gap that troubled her, as if Jesse Alvarez hadn't existed before age 10. "May I ask about your pendant?" Lauren finally said. "It's quite unusual." Jesse's hand closed around it protectively. "It was my mother's. One of the few things I have left of her. Not a lie," Lauren thought, but not the whole truth either. She'd spent decades in boardrooms learning to read deception. Jesse was hiding something. "It's beautiful. Reminds me of one I had once." Their eyes met, and for an instant, Lauren sensed a flash of something. Knowledge, perhaps, before Jesse's expression returned to polite interest. "I should get back to work," he said, carefully returning the book. "Thank you again, Lauren." As he left, Lauren pulled out her phone, sending a quick text to Ellis. "Dig deeper." Frank Bennett swirled the bourbon in his crystal tumbler, watching Lauren across her expansive office. After 30 years at her side, first as brother-in-law, then as trusted advisor, he knew her better than anyone. Something had changed in the past few days. "The Peterson deal is nearly finalized," he said, sliding a folder across her desk. "They've agreed to the terms, though I think we could squeeze them for another 2% on the back end." Lauren barely glanced at the documents. "Whatever you think best." Frank narrowed his eyes. "I noticed you've taken an interest in the new gardener." Her gaze snapped to his. Instantly alert. "What makes you say that?" "Diana mentioned you've given him library privileges. Seems unusual. He's studying for medical school. Our library has books he couldn't afford otherwise." She kept her tone even. "I see potential in him." Frank nodded, but his mind was working quickly. When he'd stopped by the estate yesterday, he'd spotted the boy tending the east garden. Something about him had seemed vaguely familiar, but it was the emerald pendant that had truly caught his attention. It couldn't be the same one. That pendant had disappeared 18 years ago along with the child. Frank had made sure of that. "Speaking of potential," Frank said carefully, "I've been looking at expanding our operations in the South American market. The timing might be right with the new trade agreements." "Send me the proposal," Lauren replied, her attention already elsewhere. Frank drained his glass. Unnerved by her distraction, Lauren had never been the same after the kidnapping and James's death. The grief had hardened her, made her sharper, more ruthless in business. It had served their interests well enough. Her drive had quadrupled the Bennett fortune. But lately, he'd started to worry. She'd been asking questions about the past, reviewing old files, and now this gardener with a pendant too similar to ignore. Frank's phone vibrated with a text. He glanced down, satisfied to see confirmation that his newest recruit, Glenn Miller's boy, had accepted the invitation for tomorrow night's meeting. The timing couldn't be better. After 18 years of careful planning, he finally had all the pieces in place. "I should go," he said, standing. "I'll have those South American projections to you by Monday." Lauren nodded, barely looking up as he departed. In the corridor, Frank pulled out his phone again, dialing a private number. "I need information on a Jesse Alvarez," he said quietly. "Works as a gardener at the Bennett estate, and I need it fast." Aiden sat in his car across from the exclusive downtown club where Frank Bennett conducted much of his business, the Roosevelt Club, membership by invitation only. With a 10-year waiting list even for the wealthy, Frank had been a founding member. For 2 hours, Aiden had watched the entrance, studying the security patterns and the types of people coming and going. Tomorrow night, he'd be walking through those doors himself, invited by Frank's organization for reasons he still didn't fully understand. Glenn's warnings echoed in his mind. "Frank's been grooming you from a distance all these years. Whatever he wants you for, it has something to do with Lauren Bennett. Be careful." His phone chimed with a text from one of Frank's men. "Dress code, business casual, bring ID." Aiden put the car in drive, circling around to get a view of the building's rear entrance. As he turned the corner, a sleek black sedan pulled away from the curb. Through the tinted windows, he caught a glimpse of Frank Bennett himself, phone pressed to his ear, expression intense. Aiden followed at a discreet distance. If he was walking into Frank's world tomorrow night, he needed every advantage he could get. The sedan eventually pulled up to the Bennett estate, the place where, according to Glenn, Aiden had been born and then stolen away. He parked a block away, watching as Frank entered through the main gate. Somewhere behind those walls was the woman who had given birth to him. Lauren Bennett, his mother. From his research, Aiden knew she had the reputation of being ruthless, cold, calculating. The articles called her the Ice Queen of Real Estate. It was hard to reconcile that image with the mother who, according to Glenn, had fought desperately against his kidnappers. As he sat watching the estate, a young man emerged through the service entrance. Dark-haired, carrying gardening tools, something green glinted at his throat as he passed under a street lamp. Aiden frowned, focusing on the small object. It looked like a pendant. Something about it triggered a strange feeling, a shadow of a memory he couldn't quite grasp. He started the car again. Tomorrow night, he'd step into Frank Bennett's world and begin to unravel the mystery of his stolen life. But first, he needed to find out more about the gardener with the green pendant. Ellis's voice sounded tired over the phone line. "Ms. Bennett, I've found something unusual about your gardener." Lauren paced her study. Phone pressed to her ear. "Go on." "Jesse Alvarez's records only begin at age 10. As I mentioned before that, there's nothing. No birth certificate, no school records. Nothing." Lauren paused by the window. "That's not possible. It's rare, but it happens. Changed identity, witness protection." Ellis paused. "The mother, Grace Alvarez, worked at your estate 18 years ago." Lauren's grip tightened on the phone. "What did you say?" "She was your head housekeeper for 3 years. Left suddenly the night of your son's kidnapping. The police report notes she wasn't found for questioning." The pieces began falling into place. "Grace Alvarez," Lauren repeated softly. The name had been buried under 18 years of pain and loss, but it surfaced now, bringing with it the image of a competent, warm-eyed woman who had run the household with quiet efficiency. "There's more," Ellis continued. "Before she was Grace Alvarez, she was Grace Diaz. She changed her name and moved across the country after leaving your employment. Find everything you can about her and her son," Lauren ordered. "And Ellis, keep this between us for now." After ending the call, Lauren unlocked her desk drawer and removed an old personnel file. Grace Diaz. Now she remembered. Always reliable. Devoted to her young son. Lauren had given her a substantial bonus when Aiden was born. Grace had disappeared the same night as Aiden. All these years, Lauren had assumed she'd simply fled during the chaos. But what if there was more to it? What if Grace had seen something that night? Something that made her take her son and run. And now her son was here, wearing the pendant meant for Aiden. Lauren closed the file, a chill running down her spine. She needed to be careful. If Jesse was Grace's son, if he knew something about that night approaching him directly might scare him away. She needed to win his trust first. Jesse moved through the shadowy halls of the Bennett mansion with practiced silence. The annual charity gala meant the main house was empty, except for catering staff preparing for tomorrow's event. It was the opportunity he'd been waiting for. Frank's office was at the east end of the second floor, a space he maintained at Lauren's insistence for when business kept him late at the estate. Jesse had watched Frank enter the security code enough times to memorize it. 08111, August 11th, James Bennett's birthday. An ironic choice for the man Jesse believed had arranged his murder. The door unlocked with a soft click. Inside, Jesse moved efficiently, photographing documents with his phone and carefully returning everything exactly as he'd found it. Frank's personal datebook revealed frequent meetings with names Jesse had flagged in his research, people connected to money laundering operations. As he turned to the computer, a soft sound from the hallway froze him in place. Footsteps approaching. Jesse quickly shut down the computer and slid behind the heavy drapes just as the office door opened. "I don't care what it takes," Frank's voice came, sharp with irritation. "I need that information by morning." Jesse hardly dared breathe as Frank crossed to the desk and unlocked a drawer Jesse hadn't managed to access. Through a small gap in the drapes, he watched Frank remove a flash drive and pocket it before making another call. "Everything's set for tomorrow night. The kid will be there." Frank paused, listening. Yes, she'll be completely blindsided, 18 years of waiting, but it'll be worth it to see the look on Lauren's face when it all comes crashing down. Jesse's blood ran cold at the confirmation of what he'd long suspected. Whatever Frank had been planning all these years was finally coming to fruition. Frank ended the call and left, giving Jesse a narrow escape window as he slipped from the office. One thought dominated his mind. He needed to accelerate his timeline. Whatever Frank had planned, it was happening soon. The Roosevelt Club hummed with the quiet energy of wealth and power. Aiden adjusted his sport coat, feeling exposed. Despite the crowd, he'd spent his life in the shadows of Atlanta's less reputable neighborhoods, learning from Glenn how to fade into the background. Here, under crystal chandeliers, surrounded by the city's elite, he felt like a fraud about to be discovered. Derek Miller, a man in an expensive suit, approached. "Frank's expecting you." Aiden followed him to a private room at the back of the club. Inside, cigar smoke hung in lazy curls beneath recessed lighting. 5 men sat around a polished table, Frank Bennett at its head. "Derek?" Frank greeted him, gesturing to an empty chair. "Glenn's boy, I've heard good things about your discretion." Aiden took the seat, maintaining the cool detachment Glenn had taught him. "Thank you for the invitation, Mr. Bennett." Frank studied him with unsettling intensity. "You look familiar. Have we met before?" "I don't believe so, sir." Frank's attention shifted to the group. "Gentlemen, let's get to business. The operation is scheduled for Thursday night, a delicate matter requiring absolute confidentiality." As Frank outlined the plan, Aiden felt a growing unease. They were planning to abduct someone, a woman, and stage an elaborate scene. The details were vague, but one thing became clear. Aiden was central to the plan because of his resemblance to someone. "Derek will be our ace," Frank explained. "His particular appearance is essential." After the meeting, Frank held Aiden back. "Your father and I have history," he said, pouring 2 glasses of scotch. "Not all of it good, but he raised you well, kept you clean, despite his own activities." "He did his best," Aiden replied cautiously. "Thursday night will change your life," Frank continued. "You'll be well compensated. Of course, but more importantly, you'll finally learn why you've always felt different, like you didn't quite belong in Glenn's world." The statement hit uncomfortably close to home. Aiden accepted the scotch, mind racing. "What exactly will I be doing?" Frank smiled thinly. "Playing a role you were born for." On his way out, Aiden passed a wall of photographs, club founders and prominent members. His eyes caught on one particular image, Frank and James Bennett at the club's opening. The resemblance between himself and James was subtle but unmistakable. The same jawline, the same set of the eyes. His real father outside in the cool night air. Aiden leaned against his car, trying to process everything. Frank was planning something involving Lauren Bennett, his biological mother, and somehow, Aiden's resemblance to his dead father was key to the plan. As he drove away, he made a decision. Tomorrow morning, he would find a way to see Lauren Bennett up close. Before Thursday night, he needed to understand exactly what Frank was planning to use him for, and he needed to learn more about the gardener with the emerald pendant, the same color as his own eyes, he realized with a start. Another connection he couldn't explain, but somehow felt certain was important. Lauren stood at her office window, morning light casting long shadows across the manicured lawn where Jesse worked among the roses. For 3 days straight, she'd found reasons to engage him in conversation, about medicine, literature, even gardening, searching for any connection to the past. Yesterday, she'd noticed something that made her heart stutter. When Jesse concentrated, he had the same habit of rubbing his thumb against his forefinger that James had. A small gesture, meaningless to anyone else. But to Lauren it was like seeing a ghost. "You're imagining things," she murmured to herself. Gee. Her phone buzzed with a text from Ellis. "Records found. Grace Alvarez died of cancer 10 years ago in Oregon. Jesse placed in foster care. Mother's death certificate lists Jesse as biological son. No father listed." Lauren frowned. If Jesse was truly Grace's biological son, he couldn't be Aiden. But why the pendant? Why the gap in his early records? A movement caught her eye. A young man sitting in a car parked across from the estate's entrance. He'd been there yesterday too, watching, through her binoculars. Lauren studied him. Early 20s, dark hair, intently focused on the grounds as Jesse emerged through the service gate for his lunch break. The stranger straightened, his attention sharpening. Lauren picked up her phone again. "Ellis, I need surveillance on another individual. Black sedan across from the main gate." Moments later, her intercom buzzed. "Ms. Bennett, Mr. Frank Bennett is here to see you." Lauren composed herself, tucking away her suspicions before saying, "Send him in." Frank entered with his usual confidence, but Lauren detected something different in his demeanor, a nervous energy he was trying to mask. "The charity gala preparations are finalized," he announced, laying a folder on her desk. "The governor confirmed his attendance, along with that senator you wanted to speak with about the zoning regulations." "Excellent." Lauren maintained her cool exterior while studying her brother-in-law. After 18 years of working alongside him, she'd become adept at reading his subtle tells. Today, he was hiding something. "Will you be bringing anyone?" Frank asked casually. Too casually. "It's been a while since you've had a date at these functions." "You know I prefer to focus on business," she replied. "Speaking of which, those financial reports you sent over seem to be missing the South American projections you mentioned." A flicker of relief crossed Frank's face at the change of subject. "I'll have them to you tomorrow. There were some complications with the numbers." Lauren nodded, letting the moment pass. "I noticed someone watching the estate. Black sedan, young man, dark hair. Any idea who that might be?" Frank's expression remained neutral, but she caught the slight tightening around his eyes. "Security concern. Perhaps I've asked Ellis to look into it." "I'm sure it's nothing," Frank said dismissively, checking his watch. "I have another meeting downtown. See you at the gala tomorrow." After he left, Lauren pressed her intercom. "Diana, please ask Jesse if he could come to my office after his lunch break. I'd like to discuss the arrangements for tomorrow's event." Jesse stared at the bank records spread across his kitchen table. He'd been analyzing the digital copies he'd extracted from Frank's computer, looking for the pattern he knew must exist. There it was. 18 years ago, a series of transfers to offshore accounts, followed by withdrawals from a local bank. 3 days before Aiden's kidnapping, Frank had moved nearly $1 million through a maze of accounts. "Got you," Jesse whispered. His phone rang. Lauren Bennett's private number. They'd exchanged contacts when she'd given him library access, but she'd never called him directly before. "Ms. Bennett. Jesse, I'd like to discuss the garden arrangements for tomorrow's gala. Could you come to my office this afternoon?" Something in her tone gave him pause. She sounded different, more tentative. "Of course, is 1 o'clock acceptable?" "Perfect, thank you." As he ended the call, Jesse noticed a black sedan parked across the street, the same car he'd spotted yesterday. The driver was watching his apartment with undisguised interest. Jesse quickly gathered the bank records. Shoving them into a folder, he needed to accelerate his plans. If Frank was having him watched, time was running out. Aiden sat in his car outside Jesse Alvarez's apartment, considering his options. Following the gardener had been a split-second decision after spotting the emerald pendant, but now he wasn't sure of his next move. His phone rang. One of Frank's lieutenants. "Tomorrow night, 9 p.m. Final briefing at the Roosevelt before the operation. Don't be late." "I'll be there," Aiden confirmed, ending the call. A text came through immediately after. "Surveillance assignment today. Lauren Bennett's office, noon to 3. Watch who comes and goes. Standard observation protocol." Aiden frowned. Frank was having him watch his own biological mother's office. The layers of manipulation made his head spin. His phone rang again. A number he didn't recognize. "Yeah, Derek Miller." The voice was gravelly. "Older. Who's asking?" "Friend of Glenn's?" "Name's Mac. We need to talk about Frank Bennett." 20 minutes later, Aiden sat across from Mac Reeves in a dingy bar downtown. The older man had once worked with Glenn, but unlike Glenn, he'd served time for the botched robbery that had first connected Glenn to Frank Bennett. "Whatever Frank's got you doing, walk away," Mac warned, nursing a whiskey despite the early hour. "I know he's got something on Glenn, making you play along, but trust me, Frank Bennett destroys everyone he uses." "What do you know about his plan?" Aiden asked. Mac leaned forward. "Only pieces. It's about Lauren Bennett. Frank's been planning something for years, some kind of revenge. He talks about poetic justice when he's drunk. What's my role supposed to be?" "Don't know exactly, but I heard him once. Said something about using the kid to destroy her before taking everything. Kid's gotta be you." Mac drained his glass. "Glenn saved your life, you know. Frank wanted him to raise you like a criminal. But Glenn kept you clean. Made Frank furious. But he couldn't risk finding someone else to take you." Aiden digested this, pieces falling into place. "Do you know anything about a pendant? Emerald? Shaped like a key?" Mac's expression changed. "Where'd you hear about that?" "I saw it. The gardener at the Bennett estate wears one." "That's impossible," Mac muttered. "That pendant was on you when they took you from the house. Glenn said Frank went ballistic when they couldn't find it after. Tore apart the car, threatened to kill them all." Aiden's breath caught. "You're saying that pendant was mine? Gift from your mother to you when you were born. Custom made." Mac stood, suddenly anxious to leave. "Look, I've said too much already, just be careful. Frank's game is bigger than you know." After Mac left, Aiden sat motionless, processing what he'd learned. The gardener had his pendant, the one connection to his birth mother he should have had all these years. He checked his watch. Nearly time for his surveillance assignment at Lauren Bennett's office. The thought of watching his biological mother from the shadows twisted something inside him, and now he would be watching the gardener too. Jesse Alvarez, the man with his pendant. How had he gotten it? What role did he play in all this? As Aiden drove toward the Bennett corporate headquarters, he felt the weight of Thursday night's looming operation. Whatever Frank had planned, it involved both Lauren Bennett and somehow the pendant that should have been Aiden's birthright. He needed to find out more. Before it was too late, Jesse arrived at Lauren's office at precisely 1 o'clock. The emerald pendant deliberately visible against his shirt. He'd decided that the time for subtlety had passed. Frank was having him watched, which meant his cover might already be compromised. Lauren's executive assistant escorted him through the glass doors of Bennett Enterprises' top floor. The decor mirrored Lauren herself. Elegant, cold, impeccable. Nothing like the warmth of the library where they'd shared conversations about medical texts. "Jesse," Lauren greeted him, rising from behind her imposing desk. "Thank you for coming." "Of course, Mrs. Bennett." He reverted to formality, sensing something different in her demeanor. Lauren gestured to a chair opposite her desk. As Jesse sat, he noticed her eyes lingering on the pendant. "I believe we need to be honest with each other," she said, her voice carefully controlled. "That pendant you wear, it's not a common piece of jewelry." Jesse's heart raced, but he maintained his composure. "No, it's not. It was custom made," Lauren continued. 18 years ago, I commissioned an emerald key pendant with the initials AB engraved on the back. It was around my son's neck the night he was kidnapped." Her eyes locked with his. "How did you come to possess it?" The moment had arrived sooner than Jesse had planned, but perhaps it was for the best. "My mother gave it to me before she died, Grace Alvarez, although you knew her as Grace Diaz." Recognition flashed in Lauren's eyes. "Your mother was my housekeeper." "Yes." Jesse leaned forward. "She was there the night your son was taken. She saw who was behind it." Lauren's composed exterior cracked slightly. "Who?" "Frank Bennett." The silence that followed was deafening. Lauren's knuckles whitened as she gripped the edge of her desk. "My mother followed the kidnappers outside," Jesse continued. "She saw Frank paying them. The pendant fell during the exchange. She retrieved it after they left, intending to tell you what she'd witnessed. But Frank threatened her. Threatened me. We fled that night." Lauren stood abruptly, turning toward the window. "Why come back now, after all these years?" "My mother made me promise to find a way to tell you the truth. On her deathbed, she gave me the pendant and asked me to return it to its rightful owner, your son, if he could be found." Lauren's reflection in the glass showed a woman fighting for control. "Why not simply tell me when you were hired? Why the deception?" "I needed evidence," Jesse explained. "My word against Frank's wouldn't be enough. I've been gathering proof of his criminal activities, hoping to find a connection to the kidnapping." Lauren turned back to face him. "And have you found this evidence?" "Some financial records showing suspicious transfers around the time of the kidnapping, but it's not conclusive." Lauren studied him intensely. "There's something else you should know. Ellis discovered your records only begin at age 10. Why is that? We changed our identities multiple times, moving cross-country. My mother was terrified Frank would find us." Lauren's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, her expression hardening. "Ellis just confirmed the man watching the estate is connected to Frank. His name is Derek Miller, adopted son of a known associate of Frank's." Jesse frowned. "Frank must suspect I know something. We need to move quickly." "I've been a fool," Lauren said quietly. 18 years with Frank by my side, never suspecting he was behind it all. Behind James's death too, I assume. My mother believed so. The timing of the changed will, the kidnapping, then James's accident. It all points to Frank. Lauren's intercom buzzed. Ms. Bennett, Mr. Bennett is here to see you. Jessie tensed, but Lauren remained surprisingly calm. Tell him I'm in a meeting and we'll call him later. She turned to Jessie. We need a plan. The charity gala is tomorrow night. Frank will be there, along with half the city's elite. It's too public, Jessie warned. Frank has resources, connections. If he feels cornered, there's no telling what he might do. Lauren's expression hardened into something Jessie hadn't seen before. A glimpse of the ruthless businesswoman who'd built an empire on the ashes of her personal tragedy. Let me handle Frank, she said. I've spent 18 years letting him think he's won. It's time he learned who he's really been dealing with. Frank paced his office at the Roosevelt Club, phone pressed to his ear. What do you mean she was meeting with the gardener? What did they discuss? The voice on the other end, Derek Miller's, replied hesitantly. I couldn't get close enough to hear. The meeting lasted 40 minutes. He left wearing that pendant you mentioned. Frank slammed his fist against the desk. Follow him. Don't lose sight of him. After ending the call, Frank unlocked his safe and removed a thick file. Inside were surveillance photos spanning 18 years. Lauren at business functions. At her home, occasionally with Frank himself playing the devoted brother-in-law. Beneath those were older photos. James and Lauren with newborn Aiden. The Bennett brothers as children. Frank standing in James's shadow at the opening of their first real estate venture. Always in James's shadow. The last photo showed a teenage boy, Derek Miller, being taught to shoot by Glenn. Frank had kept tabs on the boy over the years, making sure Glenn followed instructions to keep him away from serious criminal activity while ensuring he developed the right skill set. Frank had waited 18 years for his revenge. He wouldn't let some gardener with a familiar pendant ruin everything now. His phone rang. His surveillance team at Jessie's apartment. Sir, we found something. Bank records, offshore account numbers. He's been tracking your finances. Frank felt cold fury rise within him. Who is he? We found a photo, sir. Him as a child with a woman. The caption says Jessie and Mom. Grace. Frank nearly dropped the phone. Grace Diaz. Yes, sir. Grace Diaz. The housekeeper who had disappeared the night of the kidnapping. Frank had always assumed she'd simply fled during the chaos. But if this was her son, bring him to the warehouse, Frank ordered, and find out what Lauren knows. Aiden parked outside Jessie's apartment, watching the gardener pack files into a leather messenger bag. Following him from Lauren's office had been simple enough, but Aiden felt increasingly uncomfortable with his role in Frank's operation. His phone rang again. Frank's lieutenant. Change of plans, we're moving tonight. Be at the warehouse in 1 hour. Sending location now. What about tomorrow's briefing? Aiden asked. Cancelled. Things are accelerating. The call ended abruptly. Moments later, 2 black SUVs pulled up outside Jessie's apartment. 4 men emerged, moving with purposeful efficiency toward the building. Aiden recognized them immediately. Frank's enforcement team. He'd seen them at the Roosevelt Club, always hovering at the edges of meetings, saying little but radiating menace. They were here for Jessie. Aiden had seconds to decide. He could do nothing, maintain his cover and continue with Frank's plan. Or he could act. The gardener with the emerald pendant, his pendant, might be the only person who could tell him the truth about his past. Aiden grabbed his gun and got out of the car. Jessie heard the heavy footsteps in the hallway outside his apartment. The rhythm was too deliberate, too coordinated to be neighbors. He quickly zipped his messenger bag and moved toward the fire escape. When his door burst open, 2 men in dark suits entered, hands inside their jackets in a telltale position. Jessie recognized Frank's enforcers immediately. Jesse Alvarez, the taller one asked, though it wasn't really a question. Mr. Bennett would like a word. Jessie's mind raced. If they were here for him, Frank must know everything. About his identity, about his meeting with Lauren. His carefully constructed plan was collapsing. Let me grab my jacket, Jessie said, inching toward the kitchen where a secondary exit led to the back stairs. A sudden commotion erupted in the hallway. Shouts followed by the distinctive sound of fists connecting with flesh. The enforcers turned toward the noise, their momentary distraction giving Jessie the opening he needed. He bolted for the kitchen, but the shorter enforcer tackled him, sending them both crashing into the dining table. As they struggled, the The apartment door flew open again. Jesse glimpsed a young man with a gun. The same man he'd noticed watching him from the black sedan. But instead of joining the enforcers, the newcomer struck one with the butt of his pistol, dropping him instantly. "Fire escape," the stranger shouted to Jesse. "Now!" Jesse didn't waste time questioning this unexpected intervention. He broke free from the second enforcer and grabbed his messenger bag. Diving through the kitchen window onto the metal landing of the fire escape, the stranger followed, firing a warning shot to keep the remaining enforcers at bay. They clattered down the rusted steps together, reaching the alley just as more of Frank's men rounded the corner of the building. "This way," the young man said, pulling Jesse toward a parked car. "We've got about 30 seconds before they call for backup." Inside the car, engine roaring to life, Jesse finally turned to his rescuer. "Who the hell are you?" "Derek Miller," the man replied, speeding away from the apartment. "But lately I've been wondering if that's really my name." Jesse stared at him, taking in features that suddenly seemed eerily familiar. The shape of his eyes, the set of his jaw. "You're wearing my pendant," Derek continued, glancing at the emerald key. "I want to know why." Jesse's hand went instinctively to the pendant. "Your pendant. This belonged to Aiden Bennett." Derek's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. "I know, and I think I'm Aiden Bennett." Lauren paced her study, phone pressed to her ear. "Ellis, I need you to track Jesse's phone now." "Already on it," her security chief replied. "Last signal came from his apartment, but it's been stationary for 30 minutes. That's unusual." A cold dread settled over Lauren. After Jesse had left her office, she'd spent hours reviewing old files, confronting the possibility that Frank, the man she'd trusted for 18 years, had orchestrated her son's kidnapping and her husband's death. "I'm also tracking Frank's known associates," Ellis continued. "There's been unusual movement. Several vehicles converging on an abandoned warehouse near the River District." "Text me the address," Lauren ordered, already moving toward her private elevator. "And Ellis, no police, not yet. Ms. Bennett, I strongly advise against—" "This is my son we're talking about," Lauren cut him off, her voice like steel. "If Frank has Jesse, if Jesse knows something about Aiden, I'm going to find out myself." The elevator doors closed on Ellis's protests. In the private parking garage, Lauren retrieved a small handgun from her car's lockbox, a precaution she'd started keeping after a kidnapping attempt 5 years ago. Never again would she be helpless. As she drove toward the address Ellis had sent, Lauren's mind raced through everything Jesse had told her. Frank had been behind it all. The kidnapping, James's death, 18 years of lies, every business deal, every family dinner, every sympathetic word when the anniversary of Aiden's kidnapping came around, all part of an elaborate deception. The warehouse district loomed ahead, abandoned buildings casting long shadows in the fading light. Lauren parked 2 blocks away and approached on foot, staying in the shadows as Ellis had once taught her. The warehouse at the address was lit from within. 2 black SUVs parked outside as Lauren edged closer. She heard raised voices from inside, Frank's distinctive tone, sharp with anger. "Find them!" he was shouting. "Both of them, now!" Lauren's phone vibrated silently. A text from Ellis. "Jesse's phone moving again, heading toward your location with another device. Edda 5 minutes." Lauren retreated to a shadowed doorway across the street, gun clutched in her hand. If Jesse was coming here, she needed to warn him. It was clearly a trap. "Slow down," Jesse said, struggling to process what Derek, or Aiden, had just revealed. "You're saying Glenn Miller raised you believing you were his son, but recently you found evidence you're actually Aiden Bennett." "A medallion with my baby photo and the name Aiden Bennett," Derek confirmed, navigating through back streets to avoid potential pursuit. "When I confronted Glenn, he confessed everything. Frank Bennett hired him to steal business documents, but then changed the plan to kidnapping. When Glenn's crew demanded more money, Frank killed 2 of them and threatened Glenn. So Glenn took you and ran," Jesse murmured. "Just like my mother did with me. Glenn raised me away from Frank's criminal operations," Derek continued. "It enraged Frank, but he couldn't risk exposing himself by finding someone else to raise me. He's been waiting all these years, planning something involving Lauren Bennett, my biological mother. What exactly does Frank have planned? I don't know the details yet. Something's happening tonight. It was supposed to be tomorrow, but they've moved up the timeline." Derek glanced at Jesse. Now tell me about the pendant. Jesse explained how his mother had witnessed the kidnapping, retrieved the fallen pendant, and fled with him that night, fearing Frank's retribution. She made me promise to return it to Aiden someday, he finished. I guess that's you. Derek's phone buzzed with an incoming text. It's Frank's lieutenant. They're gathering at the Riverside warehouse. Apparently, Frank wants both of us brought there. It's a trap, Jesse warned. Obviously, Derek replied grimly. But it might be our only chance to find out what Frank's been planning all these years. We need to contact Lauren, Jesse said. She knows about Frank now. She can help us. Derek tensed at the mention of his biological mother. I just saw her for the first time today. From a distance, Frank had me watching her office when you went to meet her. The cruel irony of Frank's games, Jesse muttered. Having the son spy on the mother. They drove in silence for a moment, the weight of their connected fates hanging between them. We can't just walk into Frank's trap, Jesse finally said. We won't, Derek replied, turning toward the warehouse district. But we need to find out what he's planning. I have an idea. As they approached the riverside, Derek pulled over, killing the headlights. Frank doesn't know we've connected yet. He's looking for both of us, but separately, we can use that. Jesse nodded slowly, understanding forming. A diversion. I know the warehouse layout, Derek confirmed. There's a service entrance on the east side. I'll create a distraction at the main entrance while you slip in the back. Find out what Frank's planning. And Lauren, if she's involved in whatever Frank has planned, we need to warn her. Derek hesitated, his expression conflicted. She's the CEO of a billion-dollar company. She has security, resources. She's also your mother, Jesse said quietly. And she's been searching for you for 18 years. Derek's grip tightened on the steering wheel. After a moment, he nodded. Let's go. Whatever Frank's planning ends tonight. Lauren crouched in the shadows, watching as a car approached the warehouse. Headlights off, it parked a block away, a deliberate choice to avoid detection. Two figures emerged, conferring briefly before separating. Even in the dim light, she recognized Jesse. The other man moved with practiced stealth, circling toward the main entrance of the warehouse. Lauren's phone vibrated. Ellis again. Target is inside your area. Be careful. Slipping her phone away, Lauren moved closer, staying in the building's shadow. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a mixture of fear and fury driving her forward. In the 18 years since Aiden's kidnapping, she'd imagined confronting those responsible countless times. Now that moment was approaching, with Frank, the man she'd trusted most. At the center of it all, inside the warehouse, Frank paced impatiently, surrounded by his men. How hard can it be to find them? He demanded. The gardener is nobody, just some kid with a pendant he shouldn't have. What about Miller? One of his lieutenants asked. He was supposed to be here for the briefing. Find him, Frank ordered. He's a loose end we can't afford right now. A sudden crash from the main entrance interrupted them. Frank gestured sharply, and two men moved to investigate. It's Miller, one called back. He's trying to break in through the loading dock. Frank smiled coldly. Perfect. Bring him to me. Outside, Jesse used the diversion to slip in through the service entrance. He moved silently through the shadowed corridors, years of planning finally culminating in this moment. The evidence in his messenger bag might not be enough to convict Frank legally, but combined with testimony from Derek, from Aiden, it would be enough to expose Frank to Lauren. That had always been Jesse's primary goal, to fulfill his promise to his mother. As he approached the main area, voices became clearer. Frank was giving instructions, something about the woman and the plan. Jesse edged closer, straining to hear. A hand clamped over his mouth from behind. Jesse struggled until a familiar voice whispered, "It's me." Lauren Bennett released him, her finger to her lips. Jesse stared in shock. "What are you doing here?" he whispered. "Following you," she replied, her expression fierce in the dim light. "Ellis tracked your phone." Before Jesse could respond, shouts erupted from the main area. Derek had been captured. "Bring him in," Frank's voice echoed. Lauren and Jesse crept forward, positioning themselves behind a stack of crates where they could observe without being seen. In the center of the warehouse, Frank's men dragged in Derek, who had apparently put up a significant fight. His lip was bleeding, and he was barely conscious. Frank approached his captive, studying him with a mixture of satisfaction and contempt. "The prodigal son returns," he said, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. "I've waited 18 years for this moment." Derek raised his head, defiant despite his compromised position. "Why? What could possibly be worth 18 years of planning?" Frank circled him slowly. "You're asking the wrong question. Ask instead what James took from me that was worth 18 years of planning to get back." "My brother," Lauren whispered, her eyes never leaving Frank. "This is about James." Jesse nodded grimly. "My mother said Frank never forgave James for choosing you and cutting him out of the business in the warehouse center." Frank continued, "James and I built that company from nothing, brothers, partners. Then he met Lauren, and suddenly I wasn't good enough to be part of the inner circle. He changed the will, leaving everything to her and the baby, his real family." The bitterness in Frank's voice was palpable. "I was supposed to be his successor. Instead, I became a footnote. So you had him killed," Derek said flatly, "and kidnapped his son." Frank smiled, cold and calculating. James's death was meant to look like an accident. The plan was for both Lauren and the baby to die that night too. Tragic home invasion gone wrong. I would inherit everything as James's only remaining family. Lauren's hand tightened around her gun, her knuckles white with rage. Jesse placed a restraining hand on her arm, urging patience. "But your kidnappers got greedy," Derek continued, gradually regaining his strength. "Decided a ransom for the Bennett baby would be more profitable than the flat fee you offered." "A miscalculation on their part," Frank agreed. "But it worked out rather poetically in the end. Glenn raised you well, kept you clean. Despite my instructions to the contrary, you look remarkably like James." Derek tensed. "What's your game, Frank? Why bring me back now?" Frank laughed. "Tomorrow night was supposed to be the grand finale. Lauren's charity gala. The perfect setting for the long-lost Bennett heir to make his triumphant return." He gestured dramatically. "Imagine the scene. Lauren reunited with her son after 18 tragic years. The press would eat it up. And then, once the papers were signed transferring control of the company to her son, to you, the truth would emerge." "What truth?" Derek demanded. "That you're an imposter, a con artist working with me to defraud the Bennett empire." Frank's smile widened. "Lauren would be destroyed, publicly humiliated, her company in shambles, and I would step in to save what remained, the loyal brother-in-law protecting James's legacy from the woman who nearly destroyed it." Lauren stepped from the shadows. Gun raised. "I've heard enough." Frank froze, genuinely shocked for perhaps the first time in his calculating life. "Lauren, how?" 18 years, Frank," she said, her voice deadly calm. 18 years of playing the grieving widow, the supportive brother-in-law, all while you were the one who took everything from me." Frank recovered quickly, his eyes darting to his men. With a subtle gesture, he halted their movement toward weapons. "Lauren, you don't understand. This isn't what it seems." "I heard every word," she replied, moving closer, gun unwavering. "You had my husband killed. You had my son kidnapped. You've been planning my destruction for nearly 2 decades. Jesse emerged from the shadows beside her, the emerald pendant glinting at his throat. Frank's expression darkened further at the sight. "The housekeeper's son," he spat. "I should have known. Grace saw me that night, didn't she? That's how you got the pendant." "My mother witnessed everything," Jesse confirmed. "She protected me the only way she knew how, by running. But she made me promise to bring the truth to light someday." Frank's calculating mind was already formulating a new plan. Jesse could see it in his eyes. "Lauren, think about what you're doing," Frank said, his tone shifting to one of reason. "You've built an empire. You're respected, feared. Are you really going to throw it all away on the word of a gardener and a criminal's adopted son?" "No," Lauren replied steadily. "I'm going to reclaim what you stole from me." She looked at Derek, truly seeing him for the first time, despite the bruises forming on his face. The resemblance to James was undeniable. Those eyes, her son's eyes. Derek met her gaze, a lifetime of questions reflected in his expression. "He's lying about one thing," he said quietly. "I'm not an imposter. I'm your son." Frank's face contorted with rage, as he realized his carefully constructed plan was unraveling. "You can't prove anything," he snarled, looking between Lauren and Derek. "It's my word against a gardener and a criminal's son." "That's where you're wrong," Jesse said, lifting his messenger bag. "Bank transfers from 18 years ago, linking you to the men who took Aiden, documentation of shell companies you used to launder money, and my mother's sworn testimony, notarized before her death." Frank's eyes darted toward his men, calculating his odds. Lauren recognized the look. She'd seen it across countless negotiation tables. Frank was searching for leverage. "Lauren," Frank said, his voice softening to the persuasive tone he'd used for years as her advisor. "Think about what you're doing. This boy claims to be Aiden, but what proof does he have? A story told by a convicted criminal, for all you know. This is an elaborate con they're running together." Lauren's gun remained steady, but doubt flickered across her face. Derek, who might be Aiden, saw it too. "I have a birthmark," he said quietly. "On my right shoulder, 3 small spots in a triangle pattern." Lauren's breath caught. The birthmark had been documented in Aiden's medical records, but never released to the public. Only she, James, and the family doctor had known about it. "Show me," she whispered. Derek slowly pulled aside his collar, revealing 3 distinct marks forming a perfect triangle on his shoulder. Lauren's hand trembled for the first time. "That could be faked," Frank interjected desperately. "Easily faked. DNA will confirm it," Lauren replied, her steady composure returning. "But I don't need a test to recognize my son's eyes." Frank's face hardened as he realized he was losing control. With a sharp whistle, he signaled to his men. 3 of them drew weapons, pointing them at Lauren, Jesse, and Derek. "I've spent 18 years planning this," Frank spat. "I'm not going to let it fall apart now." "It's over, Frank," Lauren said. "Ellis has been tracking us. The police are probably already surrounding this warehouse." Fear flashed across Frank's face, quickly replaced by cold determination. "Then I have nothing to lose." He drew his own gun, aiming it directly at Derek. "If I can't have what's rightfully mine, neither will you." "No!" Lauren lunged forward, but she was too far away to reach Frank before he fired. The gunshot echoed through the warehouse, followed by a heavy thud. Lauren's scream tore through the air as she saw Derek fall backward. But Derek hadn't been hit. Jesse had thrown himself between them, taking the bullet meant for her son. He collapsed to the ground, blood blossoming across his chest. In the chaos that followed, Derek broke free from his captors and tackled Frank, knocking the gun from his hand. Frank's men, seeing their leader overpowered and hearing sirens in the distance, began to scatter. Lauren rushed to Jesse's side, pressing her hands against his wound. "Stay with me," she commanded, the authority in her voice belying her terror. "An ambulance is coming." Jesse's breathing was labored, his eyes struggling to focus. "The pendant," he whispered, his hand reaching for the emerald key around his neck. "It belongs to Aiden. I promised my mother." Derek knelt beside them, Frank now unconscious and restrained nearby. "I'm here," he said, taking Jesse's hand. "You kept your promise." Blood continued to seep between Lauren's fingers as she fought to keep pressure on the wound. "Why?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Why would you do that?" Jesse's eyes found hers, a faint smile crossing his pale lips. "My mother made me promise to protect both of you. She loved your family, even after everything." Through the warehouse windows, red and blue lights flashed as police and ambulance sirens wailed closer. Derek tore off his jacket, helping Lauren apply pressure to Jesse's wound. "Stay with us," Derek urged. "You have to tell me everything about my pendant, about my mother, about everything I missed." Jesse's eyes were growing unfocused, but he managed to reach into his pocket, pulling out a folded, worn envelope. "From my mother," he whispered. "She knew. Someday, you'd want to know." Lauren took the letter with trembling fingers as paramedics burst through the doors. They worked quickly, stabilizing Jesse before transferring him to a stretcher. Lauren and Derek followed, leaving Frank to the police officers swarming the warehouse. In the ambulance, as medical personnel fought to save Jesse's life, Lauren finally opened Grace's letter. Inside was a faded photograph of baby Aiden in his crib, the emerald pendant visible around his tiny neck. The letter itself was brief. Grace's confession of what she'd witnessed that night, her apology for not being brave enough to come forward sooner. and her final request that her son help reunite mother and child. She saw everything, Lauren whispered, passing the letter to Derek. She was trying to protect you both. Derek read the letter, emotions warring across his face. All these years, he murmured. Glenn never told me the whole story. He just said I was special, that I needed to be careful. He protected you from Frank, Lauren said, watching the paramedics work frantically over Jesse. They both did, Glenn and Grace. And now Jesse, Derek added quietly. At the hospital, Jesse was rushed into surgery while Lauren and Derek were left in the waiting room. Police officers arrived to take their statements, confirming that Frank and several of his associates had been taken into custody. Ellis joined them, bringing coffee and the quiet support that had made him Lauren's most trusted employee. Hours passed in tense silence. Lauren studied her son's face, cataloging features inherited from James, others from herself. Derek caught her watching and met her gaze directly. I don't know what happens next, he admitted. 24 hours ago, I was preparing to help destroy you without knowing you were my mother. Lauren nodded, understanding the complexity of their situation. We have 18 years to catch up on, she said simply. But first, we need to make sure Jesse survives. The surgeon finally emerged, his expression grave but cautiously optimistic. The bullet missed his heart by centimeters, he explained. He's lost a lot of blood, but he's young and strong. The next 24 hours will be critical. As they were led to the recovery room where Jesse lay unconscious, connected to monitors and IVs, Lauren felt a strange sensation, a maternal instinct she'd thought long buried awakening for not just one, but two young men who had entered her life in such unexpected ways. 1 year later, the grand ballroom of the Bennett Tower sparkled with light, reflecting off crystal chandeliers. Elegantly dressed guests mingled beneath gilded ceilings, their conversations a gentle hum against the string quartet playing in the corner. This wasn't merely another corporate event. It was the inaugural gala for the Jesse Alvarez Medical Foundation. Lauren Bennett stood near the entrance, greeting donors with the polished charm that had made her one of the business world's most formidable figures. But those who had known her before noticed a profound change. The Ice Queen had thawed, her smile reaching her eyes in a way it hadn't for 18 years. Ms. Bennett, a young medical student approached, nervously adjusting his tie. I wanted to thank you personally. Without the foundation scholarship, I wouldn't be able to continue my studies. Lauren clasped his hand warmly. That's exactly what Jesse would have wanted. He believed talent should never be limited by financial circumstances. As the student moved away, Lauren's eyes found her son across the room. Aiden, who had legally reclaimed his birth name 6 months ago, was deep in conversation with the hospital's chief of cardiology. At 20, he carried himself with a quiet confidence that reminded her painfully of James. Around Aiden's neck gleamed a replica of the emerald key pendant, identical to the one Lauren wore beneath her evening gown. They had commissioned the duplicates together, a symbol of their reconnection and shared loss. Jesse had survived that night at the warehouse. Though his recovery had been arduous, the bullet had damaged his lung, and he'd spent weeks in intensive care. During that time, Lauren and Aiden had remained by his side, their shared vigil forging bonds that transcended conventional definitions of family. As Jesse recovered, the story had broken across national news. Frank Bennett, respected businessman and philanthropist, arrested for kidnapping, murder, and conspiracy. The scandal had rocked the business world, threatening to destabilize the Bennett empire. But Lauren and Aiden had presented a united front, their extraordinary reunion capturing the public's imagination and turning potential disaster into a redemption story. Jesse appeared at Lauren's side, moving more carefully than he once had. The physical therapy had restored most of his mobility, but he would always carry the scars, both physical and emotional, of that night. The governor just pledged another $1 million, he said, his voice stronger than it had been in months. We'll be able to fund 10 more scholarships next semester. Lauren squeezed his arm gently. You've accomplished more in a year than most do in a lifetime. After his recovery, Jesse had declined Lauren's offer to fund his medical school education, instead proposing the foundation. There are thousands of kids like me, he'd explained, with the talent and drive, but not the means. Let's help them all. The foundation had become their shared mission, Lauren providing the financial backing, Aiden the business acumen he'd inherited from both parents, and Jessie the passionate vision of a world where medical care and education were accessible to all. Across the room, a commotion near the entrance drew their attention. A man in a prison guard uniform was escorting an older gentleman in a suit. Glenn Miller, recently paroled and attending his first public event since his release, Aiden excused himself from his conversation and crossed the room to greet his adoptive father. The reunion was bittersweet, complicated by the truth of how they had come to be family, but genuine nonetheless. Glenn had made terrible choices, but he had raised Aiden with love and protected him from Frank's darker intentions. "Mr. Miller," Lauren approached, extending her hand. The gesture surprised many who knew their history, but Lauren had come to understand that forgiveness was not weakness but strength. "Thank you for coming." Glenn appeared momentarily taken aback before accepting her handshake. "Ms. Bennett, your invitation was unexpected." Aiden insisted. She replied simply, and he was right to do so. The three of them moved to a quieter corner, away from curious onlookers. Jessie joined them, completing the unlikely circle of people connected by tragedy and redemption. "Quite a turnout," Glenn observed, glancing around the ballroom. "We've raised over 10 million tonight," Jessie confirmed. "Enough to expand the scholarship program nationwide." Glenn nodded appreciatively. "Your mother would be proud," he told Jessie. "She always said you were destined for something important." Lauren watched the interaction with a sense of wonder at how life could twist and turn in unexpected ways. Four people who should never have been connected, brought together by one man's greed and another's sacrifice. Frank's trial had concluded 3 months ago, resulting in multiple life sentences with no possibility of parole. Lauren had testified, as had Aiden and Jessie, each recounting their piece of the elaborate puzzle Frank had constructed. In the end, Frank's own meticulous planning had provided the evidence that convicted him, records kept as trophies of his perfect crime becoming the proof of his guilt. As the evening progressed, Lauren excused herself from the gala, slipping away to the private elevator that led to the rooftop garden. Aiden and Jessie found her there moments later, gazing out at the city lights below. "Everything okay?" Aiden asked, concern evident in his voice. Lauren turned to face them, struck again by how these two young men had transformed her life. One, the son of her blood, stolen and returned against impossible odds. The other, the son of her heart, who had sacrificed everything to bring the truth to light. "I was just thinking about how much has changed in a year," she said softly. "How much we've all changed." Jessie fingered his pendant thoughtfully. "My mother used to say that sometimes the universe has a strange way of putting things right." Lauren nodded, remembering Grace through the letter she'd left. A woman who had witnessed a terrible crime but ensured justice would eventually prevail, even if she didn't live to see it. "Tomorrow morning," Aiden said, "we're meeting with the architects about the medical center in Grace's name. And after that," Jessie added, "the final approval for the James Bennett Memorial Scholarship." Lauren felt a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the spring evening. "They would be proud," she said, looking between them. "James, Grace, they would be proud of what we've built from the ashes." The three of them stood together under the stars, each wearing a replica of the emerald pendant that had once been a symbol of loss, but now represented something entirely different. A family forged, not just by blood, but by choice, sacrifice, and love that transcended the boundaries of convention. In the gentle breeze, Lauren felt for the first time in 18 years. Completely at peace,